divide, with the Republicans rallying behind the president and the Democrats warning that Friday's attack could trigger a devastating military confrontation. Democratic lawmakers and aides say congressional leaders, including House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, both fierce Trump critics, were left in the dark about the deadly strike. The White House traditionally gives warning to senior members of both parties in the Senate and House of Representatives ahead of a major military action. But one Republican confidant of President Trump, Senator Lindsey Graham, said he was briefed about the potential operation when he visited with President Trump this week at his Florida resort. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer commented on the U.S. strike that killed the top Iranian commander. Take a look.
No man alive was more directly responsible for the deaths of more American service members than Qasem Soleimani, the leader of the Quds Force within Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Soleimani's schemes and his agents killed hundreds of American service members in Iraq and Afghanistan.
What was the legal basis for conducting this operation? And how far does that legal basis extend? The President does not have the authority for a war with Iran. If he plans a large increase in troops and potential hostility over a longer time, the administration will require congressional approval and the approval of the American people. The President's decision may add to an already dangerous and difficult situation in the Middle East.
This terrorist mastermind was not just a threat to the United States and Israel. For more than a decade, he masterminded Iran's malevolent and destabilizing work throughout the entire Middle East. He created, sustained, and directed terrorist proxies everywhere from Yemen to Iraq to Syria.
The deaths of U.S. troops are on his hands, and no American mourns his passing. He deserves to be brought to justice. He deserved to be brought to justice for his crimes. But no matter how rightly reviled he was in the West, he was a senior figure of the Iranian government. And there's no doubt that Iran will in fact respond. Indeed, they've already vowed vengeance. This is and was an enormous escalation, and it follows a string of dubious actions that President Trump has taken that have drastically increased the prospects and the risk of war with Iran and danger to Americans. And there's no doubt the risks are greater today because of the actions Donald Trump has taken, walking away from diplomacy, walking away from international agreements, relying on threats of force. We don't have the kind of risk and provocation cycle when the nuclear deal was still in place, but it exists now.
Meanwhile, fresh U.S. troops were setting up in Kuwait, part of Washington's plan to protect bases and personnel across the Middle East in anticipation of Iranian-directed violence. Defense Secretary Mark Esper said the 3,000 soldiers had been put on notice earlier in the week, and he called the order for the additional soldiers an appropriate and precautionary action, citing increased threat levels against U.S. personnel and facilities. The United States has about 5,000 troops in Iraq and another 55,000 across the Middle East, all of whom could be targeted by Iran. The U.S. Embassy in Baghdad told Americans Friday to depart Iraq immediately because of the heightened tensions. Some U.S. cities have also heightened their alert status, concerned that Iran could use its ties with terror groups like the Lebanese-based Hezbollah in an attempt to strike the U.S. homeland. Meanwhile, analysts said the strike, which sent world oil prices soaring, would be a game changer in the tensions between Iran and the U.S. Let's listen in.
This is probably one of the biggest events to happen in the Middle East for quite some time now. the Iranian General Qasem Soleimani was a very powerful figure. Most would say that he was the second most powerful figure in Iran. And he was responsible for Iran's regional strategy. So Iran's influence in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, other parts of the region. He was very much the architect of that. It had almost been sort of thought that he was too big and too powerful to be shot or killed. And so most people would not have predicted this. And most people, I think most people are surprised that the Americans decided to take out someone this powerful. The Iranians will most likely retaliate, beginning with, of course, threats against American nationals, but also in other ways. I mean, Iran will probably use its influence on the Iraqi government. The Iraqi government will probably, for the first time, order American troops to leave the country, something that hasn't happened since 2003. Anti-Americanism could come back.
Analysts also say that it would have bigger ramifications than the 2011 U.S. operation that killed al-Qaeda chief Osama bin Laden and the 2019 American raid that killed Islamic State group Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
This is not just America who we're speaking about. We're talking about many of America's allies. In many European countries, especially in a country like Iraq, they need American cover and they work with America, whether that's in the fight against ISIS or the political process. So if the US goes, it's very likely that many other sort of Western diplomatic missions will also have to go. So it's a huge sort of, let's say, destabilizing moment. And it's we're just not sure how much, how far it can go. There was a norm that was existing before, which would suggest that the Iranians and Americans had this kind of almost tacit agreement to not attack each other in Iraq. And so they could attack different interests, they could attack in the Gulf also, but in Iraq it was not. I think that has been squashed. I think there is a new game, there are new rules to the game, and I think they're both more willing to attack each other directly.
Meanwhile, the Department of Foreign Affairs called on Filipinos to cancel travel to Iraq and to coordinate closely with the Philippine Embassy in Baghdad in case of a mandatory evacuation. The DFA also called on all Filipinos to cancel until further notice any travel to Iraq in view of the current situation in the country, it said in a statement. The advisory came after the death of General Qasem Soleimani, leader of Iran's elite Quds force, due to an airstrike at the Baghdad International Airport. The DFA also said the situation in Iraq is being closely monitored and the DFA is prepared to send a rapid response team should it be deemed necessary. Due to heightened tensions in Iraq and the region, the U.S. earlier urged all Americans to depart Iraq immediately and avoid its embassy in the country.